Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark Gamet. I'm a product designer, co-founder and CEO of Slash, and a highly sensitive person. In 2016, I experienced my first burnout and it changed my life. Human psychology became a passion. In the world of digital innovations, this topic is often overlooked. We create products to answer problems or needs, but we don't necessarily ask ourselves how it will impact people's lives. Living with Technology is a podcast where I speak to psychologists, therapists, neuroscientists, coaches, mentors who work with highly sensitive people. Understanding how they experience technology becomes essential for us digital makers to build a technology that is both amazing and responsible. Today, we're excited to talk with Tracy Fields from Calgary in Canada. Tracy is a highly sensitive person and has been a therapist for almost 20 years. After she realized she was an HSP, she started focusing on helping others like her. 8 years ago, she started her own practice, Tracy Fields Counselling, where she works mostly with HSPs and Empaths. Tracy, welcome. Welcome to Living with Technology. I'm very happy to have you with us today. Maybe we can start the conversation by doing the same thing I ask everyone when I start an episode is, can you help us understand what is a highly sensitive people? What would be your definition of highly sensitive?
Yeah. And first I wanted to thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It was a really nice invite to get. For highly sensitive people, how I define them is people that feel their feelings quite deeply. And then they also can feel the emotions of other people, kind of read. Even if the person isn't expressing the emotion, they can kind of pick up what they're feeling. They tend to know things without being told. So it's almost like they can, like if they walk into a room and if two people have just had an argument, they can feel the tension, those kinds of things. And then they do tend to get overwhelmed by emotions because they feel emotions so big that if they don't have good ways to manage the emotions, they often can feel overwhelmed and then sometimes go into shutdown because of that.
Do you know any famous person who would qualify it as a highly sensitive people?
This is a Canadian artist, so I think she's fairly well known. Alanis Morissette. I'm drawing a blank here. I think there are a lot of musicians and actors that are highly sensitive. And I know sometimes like the term introvert, there's a strong overlap with introvert and highly sensitive, and I do think my memory here. Bill Gates, I think he's introverted, so maybe, I don't know if he's highly sensitive. Obama, he's also, he's introverted. I don't know again if he's highly sensitive, but but if people did a quick search on that, they would pull up some names that they would recognize for sure.
Okay, very interesting. And maybe it's a point where we realized maybe highly sensitive people don't really like the fame or don't really like to be well known. Is that?
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think what happens with highly sensitive people is because of the overwhelm, the things we want to do, sometimes we don't do it because we're overwhelmed. So they might not make it into the spotlight because of that overwhelm. Not necessarily because they don't like it, but it's like they don't know how to deal with it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we went a bit off topic for a minute. I'm just interested to dig a bit more with you. The first time you and I had a conversation, you mentioned the predisposition for highly sensitive to help others. Indeed, I did some more research after you said that, and a common agreement amongst people who work with HSPs to say that yes, they do better in professions that help others. Do you know why, and perhaps how does it manifest in your life?
Yeah, and I think for highly sensitive people, our work has to have meaning and purpose to us. So then, so for helping people, that can give us meaning, a purpose to life. And I think also we're really good at knowing what people need. So it's fairly natural for us to be caretakers in that way. And then because we tend to be good at it, then it feels good. People keep coming to us for help. And then for me, like for sure in my work, it's shown up that as a therapist, I sit with people with whatever their issues are and help them with that. But when I look back, I was kind of in my family, I was like the therapist of the family. Sometimes in my friend group, I was the one that people came to talk about whatever issues they were struggling with. And with that, there's positive and negative, because sometimes people just want to come and talk about the hard things, but don't want to do anything to change it. So then it can feel exhausting hearing about people's problems, but they're not owning it. But then when they do take your advice and change things, and how good that feels.
How early in your life did you realize you were, good at helping people?
I don't, when I think back, I started babysitting probably when I was about 12 and really liked doing that. And then volunteered at a hospital probably around age 15. And then just kind of continued, and kind of my later teens, early 20s, did a lot of volunteer work until I was actually in school and then working in the helping field. Right? So it was almost always part of my life doing that.
Very nice. Thank you, Trace. Let's dive into this episode with our audience. So, what I would like to discuss with you today, since it's a podcast about highly sensitive people, but also how they experience technology. Today, I'd like to talk about the constant stream of information. You and I remember the days where we used to just have one phone in the house and watching the news once a day. On my side, it was more like an 8 p.m. thing in France in the evening. Now the reality is that it's constantly around us, whether they are news, whether they are messages from friends, from colleagues. It's all the time. I'd like to dig with you as to how that new reality affects positively or negatively highly sensitive people. So we'll go through a few questions, and then perhaps getting some advice from you as to how to help, on one side, highly sensitive people cope with this, but essentially I would try to extract from that conversation also things that can help, on my side, designers of digital products to be mindful of, so that they can use better products that are inclusive of highly sensitive people. Let's start with the very basics of this problematic. Can you explain how this constant stream of information affects highly sensitive people? Just simply, let's start with that, and perhaps reflecting on you or reflecting on others other HSPs that you know. What are the signs that someone is currently affected by that?
Yeah, so I think the positive is we can put the phone away, so if we don't want to kind of be in that constant conversation. So if we want quietness, we have control over that. But then I think a lot of highly sensitive people struggle with almost like having good boundaries around how they use whatever they're looking at on their phone. So then the level of information they're exposed to, and they're exposed to the same amount, right, as people who aren't highly sensitive, but the impact to them. And then depending on what they're looking at, because even on a platform like Instagram, you can see stories about animal cruelty. That's the one that always stands out for me with some of the people I work with, that those are the stories that really stick with them. They get upset about it. What can I do about it? So even when they've put the phone down, they're still feeling the impact of that. It can also be, so highly sensitive people, we do tend to be more introverted. Some people are extroverted, but when we're more introverted, we tend to have a smaller group of friends. We're not as busy because we like slowness. But then when we get on social media and then we see everybody, it feels like everybody's doing everything and we're doing nothing. So then that comparison, like I should be, like how come I just stayed home all weekend and read a book, or I really enjoyed that walk by myself, or I just went with one friend. So this feeling of I'm defective, there's something wrong with me. So I think how especially social media can reinforce those feelings. I don't think they create the feelings, but I think if those feelings are already there, they can add to that. So when I think if somebody's like almost exposing themselves too much, is that if they're using their phone and they're just really feeling flat and blah, like they're not getting enjoyment out of whatever they're looking at, but they just seem to not be able to stop looking at whatever they're looking at on their phone. So whether it's YouTube videos, Instagram, the news, so it's impacting them in a negative way.
Very interesting. Thanks. Can I clarify that point where you said it seems like there is a sort of pressure that society has on highly sensitive people? They feel responsible for something, like they must be in the action all the time. And is that what you meant when you talk about the fact that like we look at other people doing things and therefore we would not allow? I say we because I also personally qualify as a highly sensitive person. So we would feel bad about not doing things by looking at how others.
Yeah, and that's quite common for highly sensitive people like that. I should be out doing more. I should want to be with my friends more. I should reach out to my friends more. And it might be that they just they're seeing people as much as they need to see to meet their social needs, but still have this thought that they're doing things the wrong way. And sometimes they get that message too. Like, how come you don't go out more? Why don't you reach out to your friends more? So then they get confused for, what I want doesn't feel good. And what I want, I'm told, isn't the right thing. And then what I'm told that is the right thing is not actually what I want to be doing. So they can feel quite conflicted because of that.
Very interesting. Thank you. How about if we dig a little bit into the different set of information, less regarding friends or what others are doing, but in the news itself, what kind of news from your experience or information triggers stress response and anxiety response from highly sensitive people? Something that perhaps non-highly sensitive people would not be triggered by.
Yeah, and I think there's, depending on the highly sensitive person, I think there's common triggers, but we'll all have our own individual triggers. Like, so for me, if I saw a story about animal cruelty, I would like, oh, like that, I feel bad for that animal, but I don't hang on to that. But if I hear stories about kids being hurt, like that goes in for me, right? So like those will be the stories that are harder for me to hear. That sense that I should do something about it, or even when there's news about war happening in other countries, sometimes highly sensitive people can feel quite like almost guilty if they're living a life where they don't have to deal with any of that, right? So why do I get to have this safe life and other people don't? So I think that might be something that people who aren't highly sensitive might not, not that they wouldn't feel that necessarily, but not to that deep level of just walking around feeling guilt that I have a good life.
Interesting. Let's say you come across that piece of information that tells about a kid who have been hurt or mistreated or abandoned, or something that triggers that reaction in you. How long would you think that lasts, and how impactful it is, like, for people to fully understand? Because I think even non-HSPs can, like, that obviously makes them sad, but maybe they don't realize actually how deeply it might impact us, and for how long perhaps, or are you reviewing images of that child 2 days later, 3 days later, when you dream, when you, how strong is the impact of that information?
Yeah, and I think sometimes, like, even as there was one incident that happened in my province, probably about 5 years ago, and it was a hockey team of young men. And it's like I even like to share the rest of the story. I already feel choked up about it, right? And I don't know. I'm not connected with the families at all, but just think, like all the loss that everyone experienced. So like sometimes the stories they just stay with us. And so I'm sure at this point in my life I've heard lots of different stories, so they don't all stay with me, but for sure, like 2 days later, a week later, I can still be impacted by that. Yeah, and then every once in a while there's that story that just stays.
So we can also easily imagine that if you are looking at that or discovering that story when you are supposed to take a break, when you are supposed to be relaxing or preparing yourself to sleep, that might just completely disrupt your day.
Almost like the older teens and people maybe into their, like, getting closer to 30, like the people that have really grown up, they've all, like for me, that experience started, maybe at age 30, so about 20 years ago, right? But the young people who've always been exposed to this, they've always had to manage this, of hearing hard things that they actually weren't ready to hear or didn't want to hear, but because they were on their device, the information just came to them.
Something just came to my mind, and I wonder if I don't know if you work with the newer generations, the teenagers now, and you have teenagers yourselves, your kids, but do you think they are desensitized to a certain extent to this kind of information? And do you see a difference of desensitization between HSPs and non-HSPs?
Yeah, and it's almost like with some of the teens I work with, and even so I have 3 teens, and one of my boys is highly sensitive, so it's almost like he's very sensitive or desensitized. Yeah, and then some of the teens that I work with, they really struggle in school because of how desensitized the other kids are. And not, I don't mean that in a judgmental way to the non-sensitive kids, but because kids are exposed to so much more, they're talking more openly about thoughts of suicide, which, and there's positive in that people are talking more easily about hard things. But when you're say hello to your friend and the friend says, I'm really struggling with my mental health, so then they can start their morning hearing some hard stuff from a friend, and just how that is a lot, because then they really carry that, how is their friend doing? And so, yeah, so lots of complications there.
Thank you, Tracy. And when it comes to moving on to a bit of a different aspect of it, when it comes to personal relationships that highly sensitive people have, in what way do you think this flow of information impacts their personal relationships? I think it's a very broad question, but is there a link between having to handle all this flow of information and maintaining healthy relationships?
Yeah, and I think there's for sure positives and negatives with it. So like the negative part of it would be the highly sensitive person is going to be exhausted just from, like, whether they're reading the information, listening. So then when they are with their friends or family, they just might be so drained that they don't really have anything to talk about because they're so exhausted. So then that can impact their connections to people. The positive that I see is that there's really good information out there around being a highly sensitive person, ways to manage difficult people or how to set boundaries, so then they can they feel quite empowered by how they're learning about themselves, which then can have a positive impact on relationships. Right? And even if they're talking more about themselves, so then their friends, their family is starting to understand them more. So, yeah, so there's both sides with that.
Very silly question, but I know that's something I'm dealing with, but I'd like to ask you how do you feel when that happens? How do you feel that when you've had a long day and you still have 10 conversations I'm using WhatsApp, for example, 10 conversations that have unread messages or people expecting your answer, but you're completely drained but at the same time you don't want them to wait. I mean, that's how I feel, but this is a bit draining. I know in my routine I try to avoid that, but yeah, I was wondering how you experience this situation.
Yeah, and just the other day with one of the people I was working with, we were talking about this, like even like her guilt around not responding to these messages, and she likes her friends, she wants to be in connection with them, and she's like, I don't have any energy, and if I respond, then they're going to respond back. So then the problem is still there. It's not like she responds and whoosh, I don't have to I've kind of wrapped up that conversation, because the one thing with technology, it's always available. Right? Yeah, and I think that's just when it comes to self-care, that like if today you can't respond because you're so exhausted, that's okay. Not okay to ghost people, but like the next day or the day after, and then like I know for myself, I have more energy in the morning. So if I have something I didn't respond to, then I have the intention I'll respond first thing in the morning. So then, yeah, because then sometimes we can hurt people's feelings unintentionally by not responding.
Exactly. There is this whole gray area where people don't know what we're doing, and or maybe it's in our mind. HSPs, we overthink this, and we want to be in control of how people perceive us or something like that, perhaps. But it could be quite overwhelming. At least that's how I experience.
Yeah, just as you described internally, the overthinking we can do with our not responding because we're exhausted, and what will they think of us, and and I think most people are understanding. It's okay not to respond back to me immediately.
Thank you, Tracy. Do you have some strategies in mind for highly sensitive people? Perhaps your top 3, or it doesn't have to be an exact number. How many you feel are relevant? Please feel free to share. So, how many? What strategies to cope with the overwhelming flow of information would you give to highly sensitive people to maintain?
What I often will talk to people about is to notice how much they're exposing themselves to technology, to the information. Because I think sometimes people are surprised by just how much time they can spend really kind of like reading things, watching things, and then to look at, is that how much time you want to be spending? And then how do you feel while you're doing it? How do you feel after you're doing it? And is that how you want to feel? Right? Because I think we can get lots of great things about all the technology that's available, but are we relying on it too much? And then to help people see that, and when we want to change a behavior, so if we decide today I'm just going to stop looking at things on my phone, that mostly doesn't work. But if I'm going to go for a run today, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to read my book for 2 hours. So to replace it with something else we want to be doing is, at least it's a good starting point. And then people will notice they start to feel better. So then they're able to make decisions that feel better for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. It's something I also experience, is that it's hard to stop something but it's easier to replace it with something else. Because there will be a void somehow that need to be filled, and that would create discomfort. So replacing by something healthier seems to be a better strategy. Is it something you've experienced also?
Completely. Yeah. Yes, if I do something different. And it's I learned that I had taken a workshop with a psychologist who does work around parents and kids. And what he said, like, so if kids are misbehaving, you don't tell them to stop it, you tell them to do something different. Right? So, and I think just our brain's wired like that.
What are your thoughts on digital detox? Have you ever, in your practice or in your network, have you do you know of anyone that has gone through a digital detox? Have you gone through one yourself? And what do you think about these concepts?
I think it's a really good thing to do, because then, so when we're not exposed to information, then we can hear ourselves better. We tend to think more clearly. I think our decision making is better. And then when we go back to the technology, I think then we have a better idea of how we want to use it. And I've done it, maybe not so intentional, when I've gone camping, and if there's no internet available, then I just it's not available to me, and I'm this feels good, right? It isn't this need to check my emails, check any text messages, any of that. So it feels much better. And then I definitely do talk to some of my clients about this, because if somebody's struggling with depression or anxiety, being on their phone becomes a really easy distraction. So they're not really noticing how they're feeling because they're looking at information. They don't really feel better, but they don't feel worse. But then they're not dealing with whatever's causing the anxiety or depression either. So that by moving away from their device then helps them really understand how they're doing, and then how they might want to look at helping themselves in a different way.
It's very interesting what you say. Allow me to share what I've understood, because when I think about digital detox, I almost think like a diet, almost like, okay, for a certain period of time, I will eat less digital information, and I will just allow myself to take a rest, and then once it's done, okay, I'll go back to my normal life. What I'm hearing from you is that new perspective that I didn't think of, is a digital detox not only allow you to kind of go on digital diet, but also allow you to take some distance and think about whether you want to go back to your life before the digital detox the way it was, or whether you want to rearrange certain things. So it gives you some time to think and reflect. Is that correct?
It completely, yeah. Because I think often people feel like they don't have control over their use, and then once they have this sense of, I do have control, like this is actually a tool for me, it doesn't have to dictate kind of what my day looks like.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. So, last question before we conclude for this amazing conversation. How would you recommend highly sensitive people, or anyone actually, to stay informed, to have that feeling that to not be disconnected, to not be a hermit or a shepherd with a few sheep and completely disconnected, but at the same time protecting their mental health? What would be the right balance between both?
And I think it's deciding where you want to get your information from. So if it's what's happening kind of locally in your community, in the world. So I know for me, in the morning I'll just read the local paper on my phone, and then it'll have things happening outside of Canada as well. So then it's really, so I'm in control of it, right? So I open up the app, I read what I want to read. If I don't want to read something because it's like that, I know that's not going to feel good, then I don't read it. So then for people deciding that, like how much exposure do they want to information? And then even like with the texting, like the different messaging services is almost like taking, like who do you want to be talking to? Because sometimes with highly sensitive people, we can struggle with being people pleasers. So we might be in relationships with people that it's like, like I think this is actually serving that person more than it's serving me. So I'm taking care of them, but it doesn't actually feel good for me. So to take some time to reflect on who do you want to be in relationships with, and then tending to those relationships more, the relationships that actually take care of you. And I'm not necessarily saying to end those other relationships, but that it's okay not to always be talking to people if it doesn't feel good for you to be in connection at that level. So taking space for yourself to figure that out and make decisions for what feels good.
To conclude this episode, I always also ask my guests if they could give any kind of advice to us entrepreneurs or investors or developers of or designers of technology, makers of technology. What would be your biggest wish as to how would you like technology to evolve? It is at a certain point now that could affect the life of highly sensitive people.
And I'm not a technology person at all, so that, but as highly sensitive people, the more simple things are, the better. So when I think of, if I do watch the news on TV, so it'll be the person delivering the news, and then underneath there's the words that you can read, and then at the side there's the weather, and it's like I don't know where to look. Am I supposed to be reading things? Am I supposed to be listening? So having something that's really simple, like not a really busy screen, I think is really helpful for highly sensitive people, and almost like a sense of calm. And I don't know how that translates to a digital product, but the calmer we feel as highly sensitive people, then actually the more engaged we will be. But if we're feeling like things are coming at us so fast, we tend to withdraw. And so whether that's like we withdraw by not actually using the technology, or we're like scrolling but not engaging with any post at all.
Thank you. That's very very useful. I really appreciate that. All right. Thank you very much, Tracy. To conclude, perhaps could you remind our audience what you do, your mission, and perhaps how they can reach out to you if they need?
The best way is on my website, tracyfieldscounselling.com. And really in my work I help highly sensitive people understand themselves better, reduce their anxiety, depression, improve their relationships. And most of that is done locally in my area, but I do, over time I'll be developing kind of different workshops, courses that I'll offer online, so that could be available to people who don't live close to me. But really it's all about educating highly sensitive people about themselves so they can go on and live a great life for who they are.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tracy. It's too short, as always, but it was filled with amazing information. So I'm very grateful that you decided to spend some time with me this morning and talk this evening for you and talk about these questions that are often overlooked at the moment. Thank you very much, Tracy.